Hello and welcome everyone. I'm really glad to see you, all of you. You may not believe me, but if you're someone who clicked on this video, I care about you. You're taking time out of your day to watch something I created, and I won't forget that. However, because I care about you, I want you to be warned about the absolute atrocity of a series you're about to bear witness to. I'd have liked to have kept the quality of this series a secret until we got into it, but I just can't in good conscience let you guys go into this ill-prepared. Sword Art Online was what popped my anime cherry back in the day, and boy did it pop it. As a newbie to all things anime, I was completely blown away by this show. I remember countless times I thought to myself, this is it. Nothing will ever top this for me. In hindsight, I see that I was incredibly naive, as essentially everything has topped it for me. There must be a multitude of reasons I latched onto it so hard, but I believe the main reason was just the fact that I didn't know any better. Today, I'm going to revisit this essential part of my history as a weeb. That way I can witness it through the lens of this now seasoned anime veteran. So if you need a moment of quiet meditation before witnessing what you're about to be exposed to, feel free to join me in mine for the next 15 seconds. Alright, let's do this. So in this video, I'm going to go through half of SAO's first arc, and talk about it episode by episode. But before I do that, I'll briefly explain the premise of the show. Sword Art Online is a newly released virtual reality game that uses microwave technology to put your body to sleep and submerge your brain into its world. As to whether or not that's actually possible, I have no idea, but who cares, this is anime. Things quickly take a turn for the worst when the game's creator decides to remove the game's log out feature, leaving the players trapped inside. Why did he do this, you may ask? Well, you're gonna have to hold that thought because he said he'll tell us later. Anyways, he also informs the players that if they die inside of the game, the machine's microwave technology will fry their brains and kill them in the real world. I'd call that a pretty intriguing premise, so let's go ahead and get into the first episode. So episode 1 of Sword Art Online is actually a fairly strong start to the story, I'd say. It mainly serves as a way to pull you into the unique premise of the show, while also introducing you to two of the show's main characters, Klein and Kirito. Kirito was one of the few chosen beta testers for SAO, so we learn more about the game through him explaining his experiences to Klein. After their conversation, they say their goodbyes before noticing that they can't log out anymore. They tried reassuring each other that it was just a harmless mistake, but that didn't last since the creator revealed the truth shortly after. While this episode does a good job at kicking off the story quickly, there is one big negative that can't be ignored about it. Klein, the second character I mentioned before, was only in the show for Kirito to give us exposition about the game. After this episode, he basically only makes cameo appearances. He's clearly nothing more than a plot device, but they made it look like he'd be so much more. Wouldn't it have made more sense for Kirito to just narrate this information to us through a journal he kept during his time beta testing or something? I'm not claiming that's the best way to do it, but at least that way you're not bringing the character into this world just to lock him up in his cell until he's ready to serve the plot again. Aside from that unforgivable sin though, episode 1's not bad, so let's just see if that quality stays consistent. So yeah, episode 2 is significantly worse than episode 1. It starts out with a long, drawn-out conversation that basically just shows Kirito banding up with some other players to try and take out the boss on the first floor of the game. Through this group, he meets Asuna, who is the love interest for this show. Now that I'm watching this again, I realize that the main thing I remember about this show is their romance, because that's what my 13-year-old self latched onto the most while I was at that awful, disgusting, cringe phase in life. Anyways, after some little exchanges between them, we move on to the group fighting the boss together. The fight has some pretty good looking animation, but unfortunately that's all it really has going for it. The show hasn't really established any sort of rules or details about the combat in this game. I know it's only episode 2, but that's why they shouldn't have rushed into this fight without explaining how anything works. Compare this to something like Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, where just about every ability is explained to give you an understanding of how it works. This keeps the author from relying on ass-pulling random abilities for the main character to overcome conflict. For example, when Ed is trapped inside Gluttony's stomach, a seemingly inescapable situation, he has to do some real outside-the-box thinking. At one point in this encounter, he uses alchemy to take the iron from the sea of blood around him and use it to form a weapon. This makes perfect sense within the show's established rules of alchemy. Alchemy uses equivalent exchange to take elements from one thing and form them into something else. This means you can't make something from nothing. Full Metal takes a more scientific approach to explaining its magic system, but that's only one of the many ways it can be done. Instead, in this fight, we get to see the team struggle to take down the boss, and losing a member of the team, who was apparently really important as the show seems to be saying, although it never suggested that before now. Nonetheless, Kirito then begins to swing his sword harder, I guess, and takes the thing down no problem with Asuna. After that, he decides he's better off solo, even though Asuna just helped him. I don't know, but it seems to make sense to him because he leaves them all behind after that. Before he leaves though, the group he fought with decides to give him the nickname Beater, combining the fact that he was a beta tester and that he's a cheater, obviously. Yeah, I really don't think they took any time to think that one through. I'm interested to see in this episode what Kirito's going to be up to now that he's dedicated to being a lone wolf. It's a bit of a strange choice, but I'm sure he decided to play that way for a reason. Oh, he instantly joins a guild. Wait, this could be good though. I mean, these people seem really genuine and sweet, and there's real potential here for character growth. Oh, they're tragically murdered within 10 minutes of being introduced. Sorry, I know I explained those events without any build-up or context, but that's exactly how it's done in the show. So who am I to change things? After all of Kirito's new friends die, he goes on a quest to try and get an item that's said to revive a dead player. Well, he eventually gets the item, but it turns out that it has to be used on the player within 10 seconds of their death, so oops, looks like that part of the episode was a complete waste of time. Let's just have Klein show up so Kirito can give him the item and move on. I also feel like it should have been obvious that this wouldn't work, considering dying in the game causes the VR headset to microwave your brain, but whatever. And to conclude this brilliant stroke of storytelling genius, let's have an emotional moment where Kirito cries over his loss while we watch him awkwardly because there's no possible way we could feel any of the same emotions right now. It's pretty clear that the only purpose of these characters was to tragically take them from Kirito and further justify him being an edgy loner. Next episode. Okay, this is just ridiculous at this point. So far, every episode has introduced new characters because those from the previous ones get tossed out like trash just as quickly as they're introduced. This time we have yet another woman who instantly falls in love with Kirito because, well, he is a beater after all. This episode mostly consists of watching Kirito impress the new girl over and over while she worships his every move. Seriously though, one thing that's been bothering me is just how ridiculously powerful Kirito is. He overcomes any and every obstacle with ease, and you never really get to see him struggle for a victory or work to earn his strength. It's starting to become clear that the only reason I enjoyed this show so much my first time through was the fact that I was unaware of the various tropes and cliches found in these shows. Now that I've watched a few dozen different anime, I have plenty of examples of shows that do everything better than this show does. But the thing is, even the shows that have all these tropes still show at least some struggle for the main character. Like with most shows, you know the protagonist will usually win, but even so, they at least try and make it look like they won't. This show straight up shows you that it's nothing more than a cheap power fantasy. Okay, I know I've been pretty harsh on this show, but I'm just fascinated by how much I see wrong with it watching it now. Just to be clear though, there's absolutely nothing wrong with enjoying the show. It'd be stupid of me to say that considering I once did as well. So keep that in mind as I continue with this video because I doubt things will change moving into the next episodes. However, for those of you who'd like to see a more positive take on this show, I have to recommend another video I just watched recently by Scamboli Reviews. I think he does a great job at explaining why the show was once so appealing to me, so if you want to check that out, I'll have the link in the description. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's move on to episode 5. So episode 5 starts with Kirito suddenly being back in the group with Asuna, and oh hey look, Klein still exists. See, they didn't forget about him. All jokes aside though, one thing I want to talk about is just how disjointed this show has felt so far. Each episode has had essentially nothing to do with the last, and not in a good way like with Cowboy Bebop, where each episode has a full cohesive story packed into one and sometimes 2 episodes. With SAO, it feels more like the author's just throwing in plotline after plotline with no intention of ever bringing them anywhere. The last episode ended with Kirito going off on his own again, only for him to suddenly be back in a group at the start of this one. Not only that, but between each episode, the show seems to skip an unknown amount of time to its next plot point. This just comes off as a lazy way to not go through the trouble of making this story cohesive by actually leading each plotline smoothly into the next. It's difficult for me as the viewer to get invested into each of these stories when it seems that not even the author can. That's a more general complaint with the show overall though so far, so let's just see what this episode in particular has to offer. So Asuna has devised a plan for taking out the boss of their current floor. She plans to do this by leading it into one of the game's villages, that way the NPCs there will cause a distraction, making it less troublesome to take down. But for whatever reason, Kirito is against this plan. Asuna even points out that they literally aren't real and are just part of the game's code, but he still says,
"Sorry, but I'm not cool with that plan."
What? Why for any reason would that be a problem? Are you telling me Kirito would rather make this task more difficult for the actual humans trapped inside this game than to let some NPCs die? NPCs that literally respawn anyways? You know what, whatever. This little scene only takes up like a minute of the episode anyways. After that, Asuna catches Kirito napping and gets annoyed at him for being so calm in this death trap of a video game. He explains to her that she needs to also learn to live her life like normal in the game while she's here, and while reluctant to accept that, she also decides to take a little nap in the grass. She gets embarrassed when he sees her doing so and offers to buy him a meal to keep it to himself. During their meal, they talk about a player who's been going around killing other players, even in designated safe zones. The rest of the episode pretty much just consists of them looking for information that might lead them to the culprit, and that's really all that happens within this episode. It ends with another player getting killed right in front of Kirito and Asuna, so it looks like we're finally going to have a plot that continues into the next episode. Let's hope this next episode uses that extra time to develop something interesting. This episode picks up right where we left off on the last. Another player has been murdered, so Kirito chases what appears to be the culprit. He gets away quickly though, which makes Kirito quite the angry boy. So he and Asuna continue to try and figure out what's going on over a meal that she made for him. And this is where I started to notice a bit of laziness in the writing of this little mystery story we have here. Every time Kirito has a revelation about the mystery, it feels like more of a convenience than him actually being intelligent. He drops his sandwich and it disintegrates, which makes him realize that the supposed killings they had seen were nothing more than an illusion. You see, this man didn't actually die. His armor broke, and at the exact same time, he used a teleport crystal to escape. And the second death, similar situation, but no point in explaining the details. The point is, these two players faked their own deaths, and they did so in order to draw out someone who actually killed another player named Griselda. It seems to have worked because out of nowhere, a couple of players from a guild known for killing other players shows up. This group, known as Laughing Coffin, are here to kill both of them. And the way their dialogue is written just makes them sound even more silly than the name. Thank God Kirito quickly shows up to show these murderous lunatics he let them walk away without a second thought. That's just interesting to me. The same guy who was against letting NPCs die lets real player killers go free, even though we already know someone as unstoppable as Kirito could take them all down without breaking a sweat. After Kirito scares off Laughing Coffin, he explains what's going on to the players he saved. So we get a flashback of Kirito and Asuna having another revelation, which again just feels too convenient. Asuna starts talking about how if players are married in the game, they share the same item storage. Kirito then suddenly asks, wait, what if one of the players who had their stuff in the storage dies? It turns out that if one of the married players dies, their stored items are given to the spouse, making the husband now the main suspect. It's just odd to me that Asuna is randomly explaining the significance of marriage to Kirito when these two have mostly done nothing but argue so far. Now we go back to the current situation, and Asuna already found the husband off screen and brings him to the rest of the gang. He immediately admits to his crime in an attitude that makes him seem like he was happy to do it. Though it turns out that the storage thing wasn't even his reason for killing her, which only makes the conversation from before seem even more like lazy writing. His real reason for murdering his spouse was because she was enjoying the game too much. No, I'm not kidding. He explains that while he felt nothing but fear over being trapped in the game, his wife felt more alive than ever before. So, as any husband would do, he shuts that shit down before she goes and enjoys herself too much. To be fair, the other characters do find his motivation just as insane as we do, but the thing is, as soon as they tell him how crazy it is, it's like he immediately realizes they're right and goes right from being an unfeeling lunatic to dropping to his knees in despair and getting dragged off. I can hardly keep up with how many 180s have been thrown at me in the past 5 minutes. I mean, oh my god. It's like they're trying to make this story as complex as they can within 20 minutes to make it feel like it's clever and well written. Why was the husband initially so cold and heartless? Because that's what he needed to be in order to serve his function in the episode. Why did his personality suddenly shift right at the end? Because there's no time left to properly develop a convincing change in character. If they're going to dedicate 2 episodes to this story, then why couldn't they use that extra time to give at least some depth to any of these characters? I don't know, and I probably shouldn't even bother trying to find out, but the point is, it doesn't. So with that, let's move on to the final episode that we're going to talk about in this video.
Oh no, he's hot!
Episode 7 is just... I just once again want to mention that I didn't come into this video planning to shit on absolutely every aspect of this show. Sure, I knew it wasn't going to live up to my nostalgia, but Jesus, it just keeps making the same mistakes over and over again. This episode is dedicated to making yet another girl fall in love with Kirito. Kirito is looking for a new sword to accompany him through the rest of his journey, so Asuna refers him to a friend of hers who is a smith within the game. She presents him with a sword, so he wants to test its durability, and... This scene is just unintentionally hilarious, especially in the dub.
But I'm not responsible.
If it breaks, then that's too bad!
Yeah, so for some reason Kirito is just a total dick to this girl throughout this episode, and this is far from the only example. But despite all of that, she still manages to fall in love with the great black swordsman after seeing him in action for the first time. To be honest, I don't know why she's so impressed. I mean, all he did was swing a sword to stop some wind, but I suppose that overrides all of his previous douchebaggery. To be fair, this is pretty accurate to how teenagers fall in love, but either way, it's not very compelling to watch. And regarding Kirito's nickname, the Black Swordsman, I've been reading through Berserk for the first time recently, and only now do I understand how disrespectful it is for this little shit to hold the same title as this guy. Sorry, I just quickly had to make sure everyone understands that Guts is the true Black Swordsman, and this guy is nothing but a cheap imitation. After he shatters her sword, she makes him go retrieve a rare ingot used to create a better one, with her by his side of course. On their way to find it, they encounter this dragon that I do not remember looking so janky. I mean, there really hasn't been much use of CG at this point, so it's basically impossible for this not to stand out. I think that with this episode, they decided to save some budget because this encounter is very short and doesn't have a lot of animation other than the CG dragon. But that's just, After fending off the dragon for a minute, Kirito and the girl fall into a giant hole, and yes, I'm just calling her the girl because if SAO has taught me anything so far, it's that the author isn't going to bother to continue this character's arc past their introduction, so I'm not even going to bother learning the name. So Kirito and this girl try for a while to escape this pit, but they can't, so they decide to spend the night there. After some awkward flirting, they go to sleep together, and when the girl wakes up the next morning, she sees that Kirito has found the ingot they were looking for, which, as he informs us, is actually a dragon turd. The girl's already holding the ingot by the time he mentions this, and for whatever reason she freaks out and drops it. Have you forgotten you're inside of a video game? Why is this collection of pixels any nastier than the others all around you? Whatever. Now they have their ingot so they can go replace the sword he destroyed. So she makes the weapon, and Kirito tells us that
It's a good sword.
you know, so instead of having to go through the trouble of showing us how it's good, they can just have him assure us that it is. After he receives his sword, she attempts to flirt with him some more, only to have Asuna walk in and crush all of her hopes and dreams upon noticing Kirito and her are already falling for each other. Silly bimbo, did you really think you had a chance with the black swordsman? Well, apparently she did because she tells us that
The getting over it part, that's gonna take a while.
you literally just met him yesterday. Is his sex appeal really this overwhelmingly powerful? Based on what we've seen so far, that's the only conclusion I can come to. Maybe that's why I liked this show so much all those years ago. I finally got the chance to see the cool and edgy gamer boy being looked up to by every girl around him. The way it should be. So yeah, that's about it for episode 7, and with that, I'm gonna wrap this first video up. We're now halfway through the Aincrad arc of this show, and I've simply had enough for one video. Watching through all of these episodes once is tough as it is, but I have to go through them a couple of times to be able to write about them, so I'm tapping out for now. I hope you guys are enjoying this new era for the channel, because while this show is tough to get through, I really enjoy giving my thoughts on it. Next time, we'll cover the rest of the Aincrad arc, but until then, I ask that you please leave a like and subscribe if you feel I've earned it, and I hope to see you next time for some more Sword Art Online.